You ever hear a sound that didn't belong in reality? A sound so smug, so perfectly sculpted to belittle, it felt like it came from something darker than just a person? That was the sound Patricia Garrison made the moment she saw my son step out of my car in his dusty desert camouflage. "We don't do costumes here," she said, and the world stopped. That's how this all started. With a scoff. With ignorance dressed up as authority. But what Patricia didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, is that the young man she mocked had blood on his boots from a village she couldn't pronounce. My son had stared down death more times than she'd counted HOA violations, and she dared to sneer. That was her first mistake. You see, behind her manicured power and HOA bylaws was a truth she was never meant to encounter. A man trained to disappear in war zones, but who chose, for 14 days, to reappear as someone's son. Not a soldier, not a weapon. Just a man seeking peace in a world that forgot what peace means. And yet, in that quiet return home, he triggered something deeper than any neighborhood rule. He exposed the sickness of control without respect, the rot of artificial order. Because this isn't a story about a barbecue gone wrong. It's not about an HOA president who didn't know better. No, it's about what happens when false authority meets real strength. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that serves, the kind that sacrifices, the kind that watches, then acts. You're not just hearing a neighborhood tale. You're about to descend into something older, darker, the ancient war between those who build with courage and those who hide behind rules they never earned the right to write. So stay close, because by the time we reach the bottom of this story, you'll see things differently. You'll understand why Jake didn't raise his voice, why he didn't need to. And you'll begin to suspect the truth, that real power doesn't announce itself. It walks silently, in uniform, through the fires of this world, and back into a cul-de-sac that never deserved it. Let me tell you what Patricia never saw, what she never could see. Because people like her, they live behind gates, both real and imagined. Their power is measured in bylaws, citations, fine print. But power like Jake's, it's quiet, it's earned, and it's forged in places far from HOA meetings and lawn inspections. Jake didn't ask for recognition when he came home. He asked for my cooking. That's all. Not a parade, not a thank you. Just eggs like his mom used to make, and the silence of his own room. But peace doesn't come easy. Not when control addicts like Patricia run neighborhoods like empires. And when she filed that formal complaint, the one that labeled my son's uniform a disturbance, she declared war. Not just on Jake, but on something far deeper. She declared war on honor. It wasn't the first time she'd misused power. She'd fined veterans for wind chimes, cited single moms for weeds 2 inches too tall, once threatened an elderly man with eviction over a non-regulation mailbox. She called it standards. But standards without soul? That's tyranny. Petty tyranny. The kind that poisons communities, one passive-aggressive sticky note at a time. And Jake, he didn't flinch, didn't storm her porch, didn't argue online. You want to know what he did? He read the citation, set it aside, and said, "It's nothing, Dad. She's just playing at power. I've seen the real thing." That's when I realized this wasn't about uniform violations. It was about the quiet war men like Jake, fight even after the bullets stop flying. The war against small minds in positions of big control. And here's the part no one tells you. It's not the Karens of the world who win. It's the ones who wait. The ones who serve. The ones who, when the time is right, stand. Not with rage, but with presence. Because you don't defeat people like Patricia by becoming them. You dismantle them with truth, with dignity, with every quiet, immovable inch of the uniform they called a costume. Now, if you're still here, if this story is unlocking something in you, comment "Real Power Walks Silently" below, twice. Once for Jake, and once for the part of you that's waking up. Because the descent isn't over. The rabbit hole goes deeper. The neighborhood barbecue was never meant to be a battlefield, but that's exactly what it became. Not with weapons, but with witnessing. Jake didn't want to go. He said, "No point, Dad. People like her don't change." But something in me, maybe it was pride, maybe it was rage, said no. You're home. You've earned this ground with your boots, and she doesn't get to dictate where you stand. So we went. Jake wore the only clothes he owned that week, his uniform, the same uniform he'd crawled through sand in, bled in, lost friends in. He wore it with quiet composure. But Patricia? She charged toward us like she was storming Normandy, clipboard in hand, plastic pearls rattling with fury. And in front of the entire community, every dad, every kid, every retiree sipping lemonade, she tried to humiliate a man who'd faced death more times than she'd faced inconvenience. "This is a family event," she snapped, "not a costume party." The silence that followed was holy. Jake's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Staff Sergeant Jacob Morrison, 7th Special Forces Group, 11 months overseas. This isn't a costume. It's the price of your comfort." And the moment those words left his lips, the spell broke. Old Mr. Franklin, the one who rarely spoke, whose hands trembled from the war he never talks about, stood and saluted. Then Robert Kimball. Then the Andersons. One by one, like something ancient had awakened. Hidden histories emerged. Quiet heroes revealed. The neighborhood that once measured worth in paint colors and fence height suddenly remembered. Who keeps them safe? But the real shift wasn't in the crowd. It was in Patricia. You could see it. Not fear, but something worse. Irrelevance. For the first time, her rules had no weight. Her control had no echo. She wasn't the enforcer now. She was the one being measured, and she came up empty. Men like Jake don't fight for medals. They fight for meaning. And in that backyard, under the cheap paper lanterns and store-brand burgers, he reclaimed it. Because real power doesn't ask permission to exist. It simply is. Robert Kimball stood slow, the weight of Vietnam still in his bones, and called for an emergency HOA board meeting right there in the grass. No suits, no agendas, just truth. You could feel the air tighten like the moment before a storm breaks. Patricia still had that clipboard clutched to her chest, but it was useless now, a paper shield against a rising tide of conscience. The votes came like thunderclaps. Motion to dismiss the complaint against Jake? Unanimous. Motion to create a policy honoring active service members? Unanimous. Motion for a vote of no confidence in Patricia's leadership? Even Patricia raised her hand. Maybe she thought it would save face. Maybe for the first time she realized she was outmatched, not by anger, but by dignity. That's the thing no one teaches anymore. Dignity is more powerful than dominance. It humbles tyrants. Not with fists, but with mirrors. Because when the community saw Jake, not just the uniform, but the man inside it, they saw themselves reflected in what they could be, what they'd forgotten, what they once respected before fear made them small. Patricia didn't just lose a title that day. She lost control. The crowd didn't cheer. That would have been too easy. Instead, they stood in silence as Jake quietly sat down, took a sip of lemonade, and returned to being what he always was. A son. A protector. A man who didn't need applause to validate purpose. And yet the applause came anyway. Kids lined up to ask about his patches. Veterans exchanged glances that didn't need words. The neighbors who once cowered under Patricia's rule now walked taller, like they'd been granted permission to remember who they were before conformity shrank them. You want to change the world? Don't yell louder. Stand firmer. Speak less. Let your presence speak for you. Jake never told Patricia she was wrong. He didn't have to. The truth showed up, and it wore a uniform. And when truth arrives dressed in sacrifice, there's no bylaw that can stand against it. The deeper we go, the more you'll realize. This story isn't just about an HOA. It's about every moment you stayed silent when you should have stood. But that ends now. Because you're not watching this by accident. The sun hadn't even risen yet when they gathered. Veterans, spouses, teenagers holding coffee cups in silence. The whole neighborhood standing like sentinels around the new flagpole at the entrance to Maple Ridge Estates. And there, at the base, steady hands, eyes forward, stood Jake. No one spoke when the flag began to rise. No one had to. It was a different kind of silence this time. Not fear, not discomfort, reverence. The kind that only shows up when something sacred is being restored. Patricia was nowhere in sight. But Jake wasn't finished with her. On his last morning home before deployment, he walked alone across the street with a box under his arm. I watched from the window as he knocked on her door. No anger in his face, no resentment, just clarity. She opened the door a crack. No longer the towering monarch of Maple Ridge, just a woman with too many mirrors in her house and not enough truth in her heart. He handed her the box, said something, walked away. Later I asked him what was inside. "A folded flag," he said, "with a note." "What did the note say?" "Freedom protects everyone, ma'am, even those who don't appreciate it." Let that sink in. Jake didn't punish her. He forgave her. And in doing so, he shattered her. See, people like Patricia build their lives on control because they're terrified of meaning. Real meaning. The kind earned through sweat, sacrifice, and silence. The kind that makes you accountable. And when Jake showed her what grace looked like in the hands of a warrior, her whole identity cracked. The next morning, a small flag appeared on her porch. Not big, not loud, just there. And 3 months later, she resigned. No speech, no post, just gone. But that's not the end. The HOA changed. The neighborhood changed. A scholarship fund for military families. A garden dedicated to the fallen. A place where the unseen are you remembered. And all of it, every inch of transformation, started not with protest, but with presence. Because real change doesn't scream. It shows up. It serves. It plants flags where fear used to rule. And if you're still watching, you're not here for entertainment. You're here because part of you knows. It's time to stop asking for permission to be powerful. Some truths don't come in words. They arrive in quiet acts. A folded flag left on a doorstep. A man walking away without needing to be understood. And a tyrant, once feared, stepping into the shadows without ceremony. That's how real revolutions begin. Not with riots, but with remembrance. Jake never saw himself as a hero. He wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson. But what he was undeniable. And that's what shook Patricia more than any speech could. She'd built her identity on being the authority, the final word. But Jake? Jake was the truth. And the truth doesn't negotiate with pretenders. The day she left that same flag on our porch, same box, same fold, with a note. "Give this to Jake. Tell him I understand now." That was the closest she could get to repentance. And that's the thing about people like her. When they finally see the light, it's often because they stood too close to someone who carried it without needing to shine it in their face. Jake comes home in 2 months. I'll give him the flag. He'll probably nod and say something like, "People change, Dad, that's enough." And that's what separates men like Jake from the rest. Not just their training, not just their courage, but their restraint. The understanding that power used with mercy creates legacy, not fear. Now the new HOA president is Mr. Franklin, Vietnam vet. No clipboard, no ego. The rules still matter, but respect matters more. And every morning, someone new raises that flag at the front of the neighborhood. Sometimes it's a teenager, sometimes a widow. Sometimes it's just a neighbor who finally gets what the flag really means. So if you've made it this far, you've changed. You're not just a viewer anymore. You're part of a deeper current. A man awakening to the weight of honor, the poison of false power, and the quiet revolution of presence. Because now you know, real power walks silently. Real power doesn't posture. Real power folds a flag, places it gently on the doorstep of its enemies, and still salutes them. Comment. Real power walks silently, again below. Not for Jake this time, but for you. To mark the man you're becoming, and to let the algorithm know this truth hit home. Because once you hear this kind of story, you never walk the same again.